Today we're going to be making some pizza. So the first thing we need to do is make the actual dough. For the dough, you're going to need 500 grams of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of sugar, some fresh cracked pepper, 2 tablespoons of dried oregano, 6 tablespoons of olive oil, that's around 100 milliliters, 500 milliliters of warm, just regular tap water, and then some yeast. So I'm using 1 cube of fresh yeast, which is 21 grams. You can just as easily use dried yeast like this one. It's totally up to you and what you have. The only difference is that the way you start preparing the yeast is going to be a little bit different. So for dried yeast, you can just add it right into your bowl. But for fresh yeast, you have to add some water and some sugar and let it bloom a little bit. I also froze my yeast, so I'm just letting it thaw a little bit here. So it's about halfway done thawing maybe. And I'm just going to start the blooming process by adding some of my hot water. It's not too hot, it's just warm. And just waiting for that to dissolve. When it's just about completely done dissolving, I'm gonna add some of the sugar into this as well so that the yeast can have something to eat. In the meantime, I can add all of my dry ingredients into my mixing bowl. So I'm going to start with the flour, but I'm going to add a little crater in the middle where all the wet ingredients are going to go in at the end. Now you want to add the rest of your dry ingredients along the sides of the bowl instead of right in the center, because you don't want your salt to interact with the yeast right away because it can kind of kill the yeast. And you can also use any spices you want or no spices at all. It's totally up to you. I'm gonna add a tiny bit more water to this and all of my sugar and just let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. The yeast and sugar is completely dissolved, so I'm going to add all of my wet ingredients into the little crater we made and just let my KitchenAid do all the kneading for about 10 minutes until you see a nice dough come together. It is important to note that depending on the temperature of your ingredients, as well as the type of flour you're using, you might need to add a little bit more or a little bit less water. So I'm actually going to leave about 100 milliliters of water for now and then add it later on if I need to. So the dough has been kneading in the machine for like 10 minutes and it's come together to a really nice dough. I also added a tiny bit more than the 500 milliliters of water. So I'm just going to knead this with my hands once on my surface here, and then I'm going to portion this into my little pizza balls. So this dough makes either 4 big pizzas or 8 somewhat smaller medium-sized pizzas. So I'm going to do the 8 smaller pizzas. Now when you're kneading, you kind of want to take from the outside and push it into the inside with your palm. That way you're getting a really smooth surface on the outside. The dough has come together really nicely now into this nice little ball that kind of looks more like a frisbee. So you can either leave your dough like this and place it into a bowl and let it proof for about 1 hour to 2 hours until it's doubled in size. But as we all know, I am impatient. So I'm going to portion my dough now and then place them into their own little bowl, like these ones, with a little bit of olive oil so there isn't a crust that forms on the outside of the dough and it doesn't dry out. And then proof them that way for 1 hour to 2 hours. And then start shaping the dough instead of proofing them twice. Now to portion my dough, I'm going to measure out how much I have and then just divide it by 8 because I want 8 pizzas. And then once I've portioned them all out evenly, I'm just going to roll them each into their own little bowl like we did with this big one over here, and then set it aside. So each of my dough balls is going to be around 190 grams, so I'm just going to measure that out. I've portioned and shaped all of the balls now, and I've prepared all of my little bowls here. So in each bowl, I'm going to add a tiny splash of olive oil. I'm going to take each ball and rub it in the oil on both sides, and then place it seam down into the bowl. Now we all know I'm very impatient, so I ended up turning the oven on for a little bit to get some hot air in the oven. And I've managed to place all of my little bowls onto this little baking sheet. I'm just gonna place those in the oven. So this is just gonna help the proofing process go a lot faster. So instead of 2.5 hours, it might just be 1 hour. I've let my dough rise for about an hour, and I've just pulled it out of the oven. So at this point, I'm going to start preheating my oven to 220 degrees Celsius or 428 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm going to be using this pizza stone. So if you use a pizza stone like this, you want to put it into the oven before you start preheating your oven. If you put it in when your oven is hot already, you can risk this shattering, which is not ideal. So I'm just going to start by preheating my oven, and then I'm going to roll out my doughs. Now, if you don't have a pizza stone, you can just as easily use the trays like this one, or even better, one that has holes like this one. So technically, as soon as you've rolled out your pizza dough, you can just place it onto your floured pizza shovel and then quickly put the toppings on and slide the pizza onto your stone in the oven. But I usually roll out all the doughs first and then do all the toppings and then start putting them in the oven. It's just better for me that way. But if you do it that way, the dough will start sticking. So to prevent that, I've cut out some pieces of parchment that also fit onto the pizza stone. First of all, this will give me a nice even size for all of my pizzas, and I know what size they need to be. And then I just place it onto a little plate and then put all the toppings on. Then when I want to bake it, all I do is slide the pizza onto the shovel, quickly stick it in the oven. That way, because it's on the parchment, it's not going to stick to this shovel. And then after a couple minutes, I lift the pizza and slide the parchment away. That way you still get a really nice crust on the bottom of your pizza. That being said, I'm going to start making all the pizza crusts and then setting them aside. Now there's a couple different ways to make your actual pizza crust. So you can either just use a rolling pin and roll it out evenly, but you can also try and shaping your crust, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start by just slightly removing it from the bowl here, putting it on my floured surface, adding some flour on the top and on my hands. Now I'm going to do the seam facing at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is interlace my pointer fingers and put my other fingers together. Now I'm going to go about 1/2 inch in from the outside of the circle and slightly press down and up, kind of making a little moat. Okay, I'm gonna add some more flour. Now I'm going to use the sides of my hand to go into the little moat and slightly move it around to tighten the crust. I'm gonna flip it around, tighten the crust again. And then using the whole palm of my hand, I'm going to slightly stretch out the dough. Now, if you're not afraid to get flour absolutely everywhere, you can slap it between your hands to stretch it out evenly. I'm gonna grab my parchment paper and just see if it fits. If it's a little bit bigger, you can pinch the inside. There. And once it fits on there, you can just slide it on your plate and set it aside. I'm done slapping all of the doughs and I've tried to clean up some of that flour. So I'm just gonna go ahead and top them with whatever I please. So in total, you're gonna wanna bake your pizza for 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how hot your oven and your stone is. But just keep an eye on it because it might go faster than you think. All the pizzas are done with their toppings on now, so we're gonna start baking them. You can also always freeze your dough if you want, and then thaw it out overnight in the fridge or a couple hours before you wanna make your pizza. It is a little trickier to slap the dough if it was frozen, so you might just have to use a rolling pin to roll it out. That being said, we're just gonna bake these and then enjoy them fresh out of the oven. If you do have any interesting pizza topping combinations, do let me know because I do like trying new things.